Hi, my name is Jenn Russell, and I am a high school art teacher in the DFW area. Today, I am going to talk to you about conversations in the art room, specifically dealing with a tough subject sometimes, hair. So here we go. I love my students. I love my school. We're in a massive school, about 3,500 students, and we have a big range of cultural demographics on our campus. So it's a pretty big split. We're split kind of evenly. There are a lot of students, and in my classroom, there's a ton of different types of students. When we start talking about drawing people's faces, drawing portraiture, self-portraits, things like that, we have to have certain conversations in our classroom. For me, it comes kind of easy because I've had my students before. Some of my students have been in my classroom up to 2 years, and this is the third year that they've been in my classroom. Some students are new, but we go over some golden rules at the beginning of class. And if you've seen conference videos I've done before, I am a big proponent of just creating a welcoming environment for your students and making your kids feel comfortable enough for them to be their authentic selves in your classroom. Once they feel safe and comfortable, they can start making this awesome art that you want them to make. But in order to do that, sometimes we have to talk about some real things. And hair doesn't seem like a big topic, but as we start, again, diving into portraiture and getting likeness of different people that we draw or drawing realistically, we have to address sometimes that everybody looks differently, and that's okay. So my priority one is to make my students feel comfortable enough for us to acknowledge that everyone in my classroom is different. And I start off by talking about that. We're all different, and if you kind of awkwardly, because sometimes I'm like awkwardly, lovingly look around the room, because it is kind of awkward to just kind of like, okay, I'm gonna look around. But yeah, awkwardly, lovingly look at everybody in the room. And in my classroom, I think it's an immense privilege that most of my students are different. And that's something that I didn't realize up until the last couple years, how much I appreciated that almost no two students in my classroom at one time look the same. But when we start talking about portraiture, we have to start talking about features. We all have the same features for the most part: eyes, noses, mouths, hair. But everybody's is slightly different. Everybody's eyes are different. Your noses are different. Where your eyes are on your face are different. Your mouth is different. How it turns upward or downward, that is all part of the things that make you you. But how do you address that in an art classroom without making some of your kids feel uncomfortable or things like that? I just say, hey, we're gonna talk about this, but this is a safe place. We all need to know this, because as we start drawing self-portraits, as you start drawing partner portraits, you're gonna have to address these, what shouldn't be elephants in the room, but sometimes can be. Like, for example, we have a large Korean population on our campus. I have to address that. A lot of my students are Korean. We have to address that. And as we start getting into those conversations, and I invite my students to be a part of those conversations, I started to realize that the media that my students consume plays a big part in that. Specifically when I started talking about, okay, we're gonna start drawing eyes. Awkwardly, lovingly look at your partner and tell me some things that you notice about their eyes. And then silence, because nobody wanted to talk about, well, some people's eyes tilt upward, some people's eyes tilt downward. Like mine kind of tilt up, they're almond shaped, but I have like a deep crease in the eye, so my eye bulges out a little bit more. And I started to point these things out on my own face, but they couldn't do it on their partner's face or about other people, because it felt like they were talking about each other. But that's not really it. So as we move forward, we started to realize that that started to become a conversation about hair. Well, I don't really know how to describe their hair. I don't know, they have textured hair. well, what does that really mean? Or how do I draw curly hair? Or I don't know, they just kind of have straight hair. And it made it seem like it was kind of a negative, but it's not. Everybody is just different, and that's okay. We have these features that make us us, but we need to learn how to address that, and specifically how to address that through our art. So in this really cool handout, I have used hair studies with my students before, and this is like a small version of a hair study. So in the drawing hair details and using directional lines to create texture handout, which I absolutely love, there are 9 different types of hairstyles plus hair textures that your students can practice drawing. And I have already shaded one in because it would be the example that I would use with my students. Yes, for example, I have textured hair, but it's not necessarily curly, it's a zigzag pattern, but it also doesn't straighten all the way, and it's also fluffy, it feels different, and that's okay. But once I start breaking these things down on myself, it gives my students the confidence to start talking about their own hair, their own features, because we have to be able to observe these features in ourselves to be able to observe features in other students. And again, I'm gonna keep saying it because I say it all the time in my classroom. Y'all, this is okay. We have to make each other feel comfortable, and especially in an art classroom, when we take figure drawing, when we take anatomy and things like that, we are taught, okay, how to recognize skull features and culturally what that means or what part of the world the skull is from. These are things that are tried and true, scientifically proven. Same thing with hair. There are different types of texture, which it took me a really long time to understand what that meant, even as a person of color. So these are just conversations that you can have in your classroom, but as your students start to look at different subjects, they want to look at different references and use different hairstyles and textures in their artwork, you can have them practice on this handout. And really what this is hair isn't drawing the individual strands, it's using value to make this outline into a 3-dimensional body of hair. So on the example, the first one I did was a textured, almost what I would say like a fro puff. And I just used a scumble shading technique to fill it in. I went dark on the edges, and then the little directional lines I made darker because I just felt like they were going to be darker, and lighter towards the middle where the light would hit it. You can have your students practice this and use this to guide the conversation in a positive manner to be more accepting of all sorts of hairstyles and hair textures in your classroom. So that is how I approach this tough conversation in my classroom. I just want my students to feel comfortable and accepted and loved exactly how they walk in my door, and that includes their hair and their features. So I hope this helps you and helps your students in your classroom.